Croeso to Wrexham News. I'm Councillor Carrie Harper.
I'm Councillor Marc Jones.
And today we're talking to David Mcknight, who is a pro-Palestine campaigner, and we're going to be talking about the genocide in Gaza. And there's some quite sickening numbers now in terms of the death tolls. 56,000 people dead, 17,000 of those children, over 130,000 injured. And David, I know you've been central in organising a lot of the local demos that we've had in Wrexham. And I remember when you spoke at the first one, you were telling us about the fact that you were actually in Palestine on October the 7th, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in the West Bank in the run-up to October the 7th with a cycling group. And we were cycling across the West Bank with Medical Aid for Palestinians to raise money for MAP, visit some of their health centres and clinics. And when we arrived in, we finished the cycle ride in Jerusalem on October the 6th, woke up the next morning to the sound of explosions. We could see missiles overhead. We could hear the sound of the bombs and of Israel's missile defense system. It was terrifying, and we were confined to our hotel for a couple of days and eventually evacuated out.
I know a lot of the framing around this is that this started on October the 2nd. Obviously, we know it started a long time before that, didn't it?
Yeah, and actually, you know, we've known each other for quite a while, and we were having protests about this back in 2009, 2014. So yeah, tell us a bit about the wider context.
Yeah, I mean, there is this narrative that it didn't, that it all started on October the 7th. But as I said, I'd been in the West Bank in the 2 weeks in the run-up to October the 7th. And our group, cycling from Jenin in the north, right down to Hebron in the south, through all of the occupied West Bank, we saw a regime of apartheid, of dehumanization. We saw legal settlements. We saw the dehumanization of Palestinians at checkpoints. It was my fourth visit to Palestine. On each occasion, we witnessed the apartheid regime, the way that Palestinians are treated completely differently to Israeli citizens. And as you say, yeah, we've been campaigning on this for many years. We've seen the bombings of Gaza periodically with the destruction of healthcare facilities and education centres, mosques. We've seen that for many years, and we've been campaigning against it.
But this is on a different scale, obviously. But no, I'm going to rephrase that. It's not on a different scale. It goes back to 47, the Nakba, and periodically we've seen upturns and downturns in that kind of assault on what is basically the Palestinians' right to exist on their own land. And I think it's really important that we do discuss that as a sort of driving force behind all this.
I think what shocked me was a figure that back in 1948, it was something like 85% of the Palestinian population were forced out when the State of Israel was created by the Zionists. I mean, the scale of that is hard to comprehend, really, isn't it?
And it explains why there are 2.2 million people. There were 2.2 million people in a strip of land, 25 miles. It's the most densely populated place on earth, not the most hospitable by any means. It's basically just a massive refugee camp.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and as you say, in 1948 there was an estimate of about 750,000 people who were expelled from there and driven from their homes. Many of those people ended up in refugee camps in Gaza, and over the past 20 months we've seen Palestinians moved all around the Gaza Strip, which is essentially an open-air prison, an open-air concentration camp, been made refugees who have again been made refugees, many of whom are now living in makeshift shelters and tents, who are bombed in their tents in areas they were told that would be safe. And it's part of the plan to remove Palestinians from their land, from the very small remaining area of land that they've got, and remove them by exterminating them, which is what's happening and what's been happening for a very long time, but on a significantly intensified scale, an unimaginable scale in the last 20 months, and rounding them up into very small areas where they're periodically shot at, queuing for food and aid at the moment.
It struck me, and we'll come on to talk about the whole Iranian aspect of this again, but there was yesterday there was an Israeli commentator on the radio saying he'd woken up to these terrible scenes in his neighborhood, where there was devastation, and it was, and he said it's quite terrifying when you see it close up. And it just struck me, this is somebody who has watched his government do this for 20 months relentlessly, and he was expressing shock now. And I get it, when it doesn't affect you, when it's far away, when it's somebody else, it doesn't. But the lack of awareness, self-awareness that, I should be outraged for other people as well, and we see Israelis having parties to watch the bombs go in, and organising food drops, which they then target. There's something quite inhuman about it.
And it's the way Palestinians have been treated since 1948 and before. It's dehumanization. If we're able to see people as less than human, which some Israeli government ministers have said that the Palestinians are human animals, then you're able to normalize their massacres on the scale that we're talking about. And it's until people see those attacks on hospitals and health centres and are outraged by them because they see them as the headlines in our media. If you look at what's been happening in Gaza, the 36 hospitals in Gaza, which were fully functional before October 2023, none of them are now fully functional. Many of them have been completely destroyed, but that hasn't been a headline news. No. But the attacks on Israeli civilian infrastructure is headline news, and these are seen as atrocities, and rightly so. But what about the atrocities that have been committed against the Palestinians over the last 20 months and before?
The discrepancies in terms of the coverage have been awful. You see this in terms of the headlines, don't you? Newspapers, the way things are frayed in terms of BBC reports, especially when you have a situation, you're talking about what government ministers are doing openly. And Smotrich has said, finance minister, I think his name in the Israeli government, that they want to cleanse Gaza, the Palestinians. That's an open declaration of intent for ethnic cleansing, isn't it? Now, it's just so shocking to have a situation where that headline isn't across every news outlet that you can think of. But it's just quietly, well, we won't look at that. It's that blatant now, isn't it? I mean, it's calling it, it's the first genocide that's been live streamed. You all see what's happening. But the fact that the way that the whole agenda is reshaped and reframed and smoke and mirrors and just these absolute war crimes just being avoided and not being put in front of people so that they can, really understand what's going on. I've never seen anything like this before. I hope we don't ever again, but that's quite staggering, I think.
No, I don't think any of us have. Certainly not in my lifetime and years of peace campaigning, and I was involved in protests against the Iraq War 20 odd years ago. But I think I've never seen anything like what we're seeing from the images that have been coming out of Gaza from the last 20 months. And people can see it now with social media. They can see it on the different social media outlets. But the mainstream media have not been covering it.
You've got two different events basically happening. You've got what's reported by the mainstream, and then you've got what is appearing on your TikTok and your Twitter feed. And it's completely different stories now.
I just feel we've lost all sense of, or the media have lost all sense of perspective in trying to address that, that fake balance, because you've got a catastrophe going on, and it's not being addressed in the sense of these people are committing war crimes, and yet they have the audacity to take the moral high ground. It's just so difficult to comprehend.
Why is it so difficult? Because if you've got, November last year, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. You've got the ICJ also investigating genocide, Israel for genocide. It's not as if there's any real question mark here in terms of what's going on, is there? There's a real avoidance of actually acknowledging what's going on. That's the worst thing. What else has to happen until there's just some humanity in the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it? Because it keeps getting worse. You seeing the images of people queuing up for aid and being shot at. You rightly point out that the Israeli Prime Minister and the former Defense Minister have International Criminal Court arrest warrants out for them. I think there was an article in one of the Sunday newspapers, co-written by Yoav Gallant and a prominent British historian, calling for the overthrow of the government in Iran. So you've got a prominent British historian sharing a newspaper column space with a wanted war criminal.
The platform in it.
Yeah.
And I think, I suppose it's a good time to touch on the response in the UK, Starmer in particular. You feel like shouting at your phone when you're looking at some of the statements that are being released, just this reluctance to do anything.
Well, it was worse than that early on, that Israel has the right to cut off water and food to basically starving people. That wasn't any kind of neutral stance. That was fully behind.
Israel's got the right to defend
that genocide
over and over and over.
Yeah. And that empowers any authoritarian regime, doesn't it? If you've got the USA, the UK, other Western states behind you, you're going to say, crack on, boys, There's no break on this at all.
It's like a parallel universe, isn't there? Watching this play out, that couldn't possibly... If you'd have asked me a few years ago if this could possibly happen, you could not envision a situation that would be as skewed as this.
No. And I think, those statements by Starmer early on, if you look at what you've mentioned in terms of the International Court of Justice investigating Israel for genocide, those are the kind of statements that senior Israeli officials were making and have been making. Those are genocidal, statements with genocidal intent, is to deliberately deliberately deny people of the means of basic survival, like food and water and medical supplies. These are the kind of things that contribute towards the extermination of a people. And Starmer and others in the UK government need to be held account for them. And I think the other aspect of this is UK complicity in terms of the arms trade. There is still an arms trade between the UK and Israel, despite those issuances of arrest warrants. Despite the International Court of Justice interim ruling around, all states having an obligation to prevent genocide. You don't prevent genocide after it's happened. You don't wait until it's happened, and say, yes, this was definitely a genocide. You look at the facts on the ground and make a determination as to what's happening, and it's quite clear. And numerous scholars, eminent genocide scholars, have said what's happening is a genocide. And the UK government has a responsibility under the Genocide Convention to act and take all necessary steps to prevent it. They're not doing so. They're providing,
But instead of that, they're actively, like say, not just supplying arms, but flying missions in support of that. And it beggars belief that there's not been more outrage, to be honest with you. But then that brings you to how protest and campaigning has been suppressed by this government as well, which is equally worrying, I think, for democracy.
No, absolutely. And you've seen from from day one, when the first demonstrations in London were organised by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the Stop the War Coalition, and a number of other organisations, you've seen deliberate attempts from the police to undermine, to prevent those protests, to restrict where people march. And then more recently, you've seen the arrest of some of those leaders of the protests, people from Stop the War, the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, facing charges. So it's a deliberate attempt to undermine our civil rights here and limit our ability to hold our government to account by the means that we would normally do so, by our democratic right to protest.
Yeah, and you do feel that things are sliding, whereas, Starmer himself was defending, as a human rights lawyer, was defending the rights of people to break into RAF bases and do symbolic gestures for peace. Now he's banned an organisation for spray painting an airplane.
Yeah, there's a real hypocrisy. There's a creeping, well, not so creeping authoritarianism coming from the Starmer government, and it is really, really concerning. And I think people in this country need to be very worried about the kind of measures that have been taken. As you say, Starmer, as ostensibly a human rights lawyer a number of years ago, defended those individuals. And I think people want to be able to do something, take some kind of practical action. They've written to their MPs, they've organised demonstrations, they've attended marches and rallies, but they still see the bombs, the drones being manufactured in this country, and they still see the devastation and the destruction of an entire people. And people have a right to hold their governments to account and to take action to prevent extermination and genocide.
I think in terms of Starmer as well, there's just nothing authentic about that man. He doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't seem to have any values. It's just, he just tilts to the line, doesn't he, of the US. And we saw that over the last few days in terms of the escalation, really. I mean, Israel have been desperate for a long time to pull in the US and Iran and make this a wider conflict. And I think it's quite scary what's happened over the last couple of days, because it looks like at the moment that they're succeeding, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we go back 20 odd years ago to the run up to the Iraq War, another Labour government under Tony Blair, carrying us into a war, an illegal war, a war with no UN authorization, following the US into
Weapons
that war.
Of mass destruction,
and false narratives, and we can see it. It's the same playbook. I don't think Starmer's as good as a orator as Blair, but I think that it's the same trajectory. We are, again, it's a very, very dangerous moment where the US actions could lead us into a third world war, and this is a very real possibility. You've got two nuclear armed states who have attacked Iran, Israel, who's a nuclear arsenal is never declared, is not subject to any monitoring, is not subject to, is not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, doesn't openly admit that it has nuclear weapons, and you've got Iran, who even the US intelligence services don't have nuclear weapons. It's precisely because they don't have nuclear weapons that they were able to attack them.
And Trump's just said his own intelligence service is wrong.
Yeah.
To excuse what he's done over the last few days.
Yeah, and the other thing, what worries me is, though, it can become very depressing, and you can say, well, we've been protesting for 20 months, it's escalating, not getting better. Is there any beacon of hope? Is there any sense that, do you know what, we can turn this around? Because it is for a campaigner, for people who actually don't support genocide, it's a profoundly depressing state of affairs, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think it's very difficult to keep hope and motivation alive in times like these. And you've had lots and lots of new people, a lot of them young people, a new generation of activists who joined the marches and rallies and vigils, who, after what is now nearly 21 months, are seeing not a any kind of resolution in sight, but they're seeing an escalation and a potential escalation to the entire region. So it is difficult to keep hope. But I think those of us who have been involved in peace campaigning for a number of years, you know that you have to be in it for the long term. Slightly before my time, but I know that friends of mine and colleagues of mine who are involved in the anti-apartheid movement, that movement, it took many years, many decades, until we saw apartheid ended. And it was right towards the end of apartheid where some of the worst atrocities took place. And so we've got a responsibility to have hope. We've got privileges at the moment in this country, relative freedoms to act, and our Palestinian brothers and sisters who are subject to massacres on a daily basis. The least we can do is to continue campaigning, putting pressure on our elected representatives, continuing to join the marches and rallies and supporting the boycott, divestment and sanctions. These things do work. The boycott, divestment and sanctions worked in against the apartheid regime in South Africa. But there appears to be a reluctance from the establishment to support that. The sporting boycott in South Africa was very, very significant. You look at how sport and music and things like that in this country are so important to people's everyday lives. If there was a significant sporting boycott and cultural boycott, I think that would be, it would be a huge sort of move towards ending our support for the Israeli government's genocide.
I think as well, for a lot of people, they think of the Middle East and they think, this is very far away. And unless you've looked at this issue in a lot of detail, you've been to the demos, people don't necessarily understand that if there's an escalation here, as we're currently seeing, then absolutely these issues land on our doorstep here as well. So if things escalate with Iran, for instance, and they block the Strait of Hormuz, then that's 20% of the world's oil and gas. That is massive. That would mean higher fuel prices here. That would mean inflation going up. A wider conflict potentially means mass migration and things as well. So if people think this has nothing to do with them, a human issue like this is always something to do with everybody. But I mean, there's a real possibility that you're not going to be able to ignore this situation because it's going to be global if we're not careful.
Yeah, and I think it is important, I speak to somebody who has kind of been very despondent after campaigning for a long time, and you're thinking, do you know what, now is the time to redouble your efforts. I mean, I know there's a protest being organised in Llandudno on Saturday with the Welsh Labour Conference there. It's really important. You've got to focus on those kind of people who are making decisions, people in government. They really have to be responsible. They can't hide in anonymous offices and behind police ranks. They have to face the people. I think it's really important that people turn out for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the hopeful things that has happened over the last 21 months or so is that coming together of people right across Wales in small villages, towns and cities, where lots of new people have come on board. Seasoned peace activists have been involved. And we've seen vigils and demonstrations weekly across towns and cities, for 20 months, right across Wales, in Mold, in Wrexham, in Cardiff, in Carnarvon, in Bala, right across the country. And I think this weekend at the Welsh Labour Conference, that coalition of groups, Stop the War Cymru, PSC Cymru, CND Cymru, and other organisations, these activists who have been campaigning against the genocide will come together to put pressure on Welsh Labour. There'll be a number of North Wales MPs there who have been absolutely diabolical. They have not stood up. They have not called and campaigned for a ceasefire. They have not called for an arms embargo. They have not called for sanctions. They've responded to constituents with empty platitudes. We need to see action from our members of parliament, because inaction is complicity. When you're talking about a genocide, inaction is a complicity. So I think you're right. We need to redouble our efforts. We need to continue to put pressure on the Senedd and the and Westminster governments. It's because There are places in Wales where parts are manufactured for the jets that are dropping the bombs on Gaza. There's training of Israeli pilots. There's all sorts of complicity in terms of pension funds in Wales. And there's a big campaign to divest from arms companies that are supporting the genocide, from financial institutions that are supporting the Israeli government's increased settlement building in the West Bank, and those things are important. We need to look at where we're investing, and you speak to someone who's got a pension in their local government pension scheme and ask them whether they want their pension invested in a genocide and human rights abuses. People are going to say no, but there is action that people can take, and that's happening as well. I think just going back to what you're saying about the risk of the escalation now, what we said at the time of the Iraq War is that this will risk increased terrorism attacks. And that's exactly what's happened. And it wasn't just us as peace campaigners, it was people within the intelligence community. They were warning that at the time, and they're doing it again as well, to say that if we join this attack on Iran that Israel and the US have launched, then we put ourselves at risk of terrorist attacks. And that is a real concern. It's been borne out. That's happened after the Iraq War. And it will happen again should we be as stupid as to join the US in bombing Iran.
Yeah. And that's the thing we've got to get over to people, I think, isn't it? This is a wider scale problem.
There'll be a lot of people who maybe aren't currently involved with weekly demos or upcoming protests and things like that, but that feel really strongly about this and maybe do want to come out and support. How can they find out what's going on where?
I think there's lots of stuff online. I know that the Stop the War websites and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign websites have links to the local groups and vigils. Google or search your local town or village or community Palestine demo or vigil or protest, and you'll come up with something.
If there's any social media links, I'll make sure that they go up in the comments section on Facebook and places.
And
there's
been 2 new branches of Palestine Solidarity Campaign established over the last 12 months as a result of this, and it demonstrates people's willingness to get involved and to take action. And a lot of polls have demonstrated that people right across Wales and right across the UK don't support what's going on. No. They don't support it, and they oppose our government's involvement.
Okay. Well, diolch yn fawr, David. Thanks for coming to speak to us.
Croeso. Diolch.